to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Aloha, everyone, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin. And today we have a very special episode with our guest, Edward T. Martin, and we're going to talk about Jesus and lost years and all the mysteries behind the story of Jesus. I'll read a little bit before I introduce Edward. Suppose the life of Jesus, the Nazarene Teacher, the Christ, was not what mainstream history and religion have taught us for nearly 20 centuries. Suppose that key aspects of the story of his life, death, and resurrection are very different and even more amazing than the versions we in the West have come to accept or perhaps doubt. Wouldn't you be curious? And haven't you ever wondered about all those mysterious missing lost years? So in this interview, we're going to interview author, explorer, and teacher Edward T. Martin, and he will reveal a narrative known and documented beginning nearly 2,000 years ago, the story of Jesus' travel, studies, and teachings in India and surrounding regions, his survival of the crucifixion, and many victims of the crucifixion have been known to survive, and his miraculous long life unknown to most people in the West. And this is exciting, groundbreaking information. A little bit about Edward T. Martin. He grew up as a member of the Church of Christ in a small Texas town, and he had a question, a simple biblical question that he put to his teachers, and he asked them, what happened, where was Jesus from ages 12 to 30? It seemed like a rather large amount of time to be left out of biblical accounts. And the answer he received was that God doesn't want us to know about that, or it would have been in the Bible, which was wholly unsatisfying to this young man. So this question stayed with him, and he went on to get his degree in Bachelor of Arts from Fairbanks, from the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, and he majored in speech communications. I think I read or heard he knows 7 languages. He went to the Peace Corps. Went to Afghanistan in the 70s, he taught adult education in the Fiji Islands, he was in Saudi Arabia, and Peshawar, Pakistan. So he traveled a lot, and he eventually became a writer and photographer for the Dispatch newspaper in El Paso, Texas, when he began writing about the issue of Jesus' lost year. But the mere suggestion that he made in one article about Jesus might have spent part of the missing years in India made him severely out of step with the prevailing fundamentalist Christians, thinking of his hometown. And so he learned that people thought that he was out of touch with reality for thinking that Jesus ever went to India. So fast forward here, and he studied things like the sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce, Christ in Kashmir was developed, the secret life of Jesus Christ, the Korean gospel, the lost years of Jesus. Jesus lived in India, and finally he read the autobiography of a yogi by Yogananda. So this led to Ed writing the manuscript for his book, King of Travelers, Jesus' Lost Year in India, which eventually ended up becoming the movie Jesus in India with Paul Davis, and they worked together. So, Sasha, before we bring on Edward, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm very excited about this show. Jesus is, of course, one of my great heroes of all times, and it's striking how his teachings and that of the Buddha are so similar, and there's even the implication that he may have studied Buddhism when he was in India. I know that in the Gospels that get translated to most of us are written 150 years after Jesus' death, by people who didn't even know him while he was alive. And Ed Martin has gone to put himself in huge danger to go follow this story up in India, where he had to deal with hostile Muslim extremists, and he's got a lot of really great stuff to tell us, and I'm eager to hear it.
Welcome to our show, Edward. Are you there?
I'm here. Thank you, Janet and Sasha, for inviting me.
What else would you like to tell our audience that we may have missed about your story, your bio and everything?
I'm sorry, say that over again, Janet.
What
say
else
that again?
would you like to tell? What else would you like to tell our audience about yourself?
Well, that I was raised as a fundamentalist Christian in a small town in the Texas Hill Country, and from an early age, from early childhood, that I was very interested about going to India. And my parents could not understand why I was so interested about India. And as a teenager, on my own, from things I was reading and things I was thinking, I began to believe in reincarnation and karma. And my parents were mystified about my beliefs that way also. What I found out later as an adult, I found out that about one of my past lifetimes was 2,000 years ago in India. I was a young Hindu priest in India who was a friend of young Jesus, 16-year-old Jesus, as he was a student at the Jagannath Temple at Puri. And so I, at a deep soul level, my interest and my knowledge about Jesus in India is not theory, it's direct knowledge.
Wow, fascinating. So I guess we should begin with the beginning, and I have a series of questions, and you can, maybe answer the best of your ability. Well, how did you start? You got interested in this. How did you go from an interest in the story to, manifesting it and creating the book? If you want to maybe start with the beginning of your journey.
Well, one of the things that happened that I was very interested, have been through the years very interested about UFOs and the UFO phenomena. And there's a connection here, and I'll explain what it is. And what happened was that concerning my interest about UFOs, when I was 12 years old, my father and I saw a hovering UFO, a silvery glowing disc at night in a remote area in central Texas, the Texas Hill Country, an area near the Colorado River in central Texas, a really remote place. And then years later, there was another sighting, another UFO experience that I had when I was 20 years old up in Alaska, in the Alaska range, UFO sighting. But about UFOs, that led me into being interested about attending UFO conferences, and starting in the early 1990s, I started to attend the Rocky Mountain UFO conference up at Laramie, Wyoming. And, of course, it was Dr. Leo Sprinkle and Dr. June Parnell who, for about 20 years or so, every summer in June, they would put on the Rocky Mountain UFO conference. Well, I started attending that in the early 1990s, and one of the things that this is a kind of an unusual way to go about things, but one of the things that Leo Sprinkle can do, if you ask him, he can go into the trance state and talk about his spirit guides are able to access the Akashic records, and they will go into great detail, if you like, about past lifetimes that you may have had, and so forth. And one thing that Leo, of course, does a lot of is hypnosis. Well, concerning my book, I in that early part of the 1990s, I'd not written any of my books yet. That I wrote my first book in 1999. But what happened was that I asked, there's a great, wonderful book called Mass Dreams of the Future by Dr. Helen Wambach and Dr. Chet Snow, and Leo Sprinkle was involved with that book, Mass Dreams of the Future. That book was about people voluntarily being put under hypnosis and being progressed into the future and describing future events. Well, in the early 1990s, one thing I did while I was up at Laramie after the conference, I scheduled some sessions with Leo, and I said, here's an experiment I'd like us to try. I'd like you to hypnotize me and then progress me into the future. For example, if we were to do that now, let's say under hypnosis, let's say if you, Janet, or Sasha were to be put under hypnosis, and then Dr. Sprinkle could say something like, okay, let's go now next year, 2016, it's the 4th of July. Where are you on the 4th of July? What's happening in your life? And so on. Well, anyway, with the jumping that Leo and I did under hypnosis, that was in about 1992, and we progressed all the way. We progressed 25 or more years into the future. And what happened was that at some point in there, beyond 1999, that I had a meeting. It was 4th of July. I was at a meeting with a movie producer and a screenwriter in Hollywood, across the street from Grauman's Chinese Theater. And Leo asked, what are you talking about? And I said, we're talking about the possibility of my first book being made into a movie. And Leo said, what's your first book about? And I said, it's about Jesus in India. And so I'd not written the book. You see what I'm getting at? In other words, what came out under hypnosis was what gave me the idea to write the book.
Wow, fascinating.
Or maybe you already wrote the book and you just were coming back to the present to tell yourself about it.
Well, I think my understanding from the Casey material is that the past, the present, and the future are all happening simultaneously. I
agree.
But anyway, what happened was that when I had been researching and thinking and reading about Jesus in India for many years, but it had not occurred to me before that to actually write a book on the subject, that I could put together enough material and write the book. But I've made 3 trips to India now. I've done a lot of research, and I'm still doing more research. So it's an ongoing process.
Fascinating. So let's go to the story of Jesus. I think that Jesus was an extraterrestrial, but that's kind of fast forwarding it. So we'll get back to what you think and your studies. I haven't read your book and I haven't seen the movie, and I apologize for that. So where does your story begin? Are you just traveling? Are you just getting the lost years in India, or do you go back in time? Do you look at the birth and the historical Jesus and all that stuff?
Well, my first book, King of Travelers, Jesus' Lost Years in India, the title King of Travelers, by the way, refers to Jesus. And the story behind the title is that one place where I was teaching overseas was in Pakistan. That was in the latter 1980s. I was teaching with International Rescue Committee in Peshawar, Pakistan, and there were a lot of refugees from the war in Afghanistan. At the time, the Russians were in Afghanistan. And what happened was I had one of my evening classes of adults. Many of the students in the class were either medical doctors or PhDs, and they called it the doctor's class. And we had some great conversations. They told me about a great Muslim traveler in the 1200s named Ibn Battuta from Morocco. And Ibn Battuta was a great traveler like Marco Polo, and Ibn Battuta had traveled all the way across to China and so on. And he finally returned to North Africa, and on his deathbed, some admirers gathered and said, "You are the greatest of all travelers." And the story was that Ibn Battuta sat up on his elbow, and he smiled and shook his finger and said, "No, if you learn the truth about Hazrat Isa, Prophet Jesus, you will find that Jesus is King of Travelers." And the phrase King of Travelers stuck in my mind. I just loved that. And the title was not taken. So that's how the title King of Travelers, Jesus' Lost Years in India, came about for my first book. And my first book, it describes my experiences in the Peace Corps in Afghanistan, and my first travels, my first research, the first time I went through Pakistan into India, and the evidence as I accumulated it, and part of the evidence that I was not looking for was the tomb of Mary up in northern Pakistan, at Murree, Pakistan. That's Mary, the mother of Jesus.
So Mary, the mother of Jesus. So how did everybody get from where they were to Pakistan? If you can kind of give us a sequence. So what happened? I guess it's after the crucifixion. Was there a crucifixion? Did he die? Yeah, let's go into some of that.
Yes, and what happened was the first chapter in King of Travelers is a very strange bottle of beer, a connection with Jesus in India. And basically what happened was, as I was teaching in the Peace Corps in Afghanistan, that one day after work, I'd gone over to the American Embassy Annex in Kabul, Afghanistan, and it can be really emotionally depressing to be working in Afghanistan, and there's a lot of xenophobia, fear and distrust and dislike of foreigners. And what happened was that after work one day, I went over to the American Embassy Annex, where they had a bar in there, and they had a Pakistani Christian bartender named Mr. Wilson, and what happened was that I saw a bottle of beer behind the counter. It was quiet time, about 4 p.m. I saw a bottle of beer behind the counter that said Murray Lager. And so I asked him to hand it to me, and he did. And then I asked Murray, I said, is it named for an Englishman? And he said, no, Sahib, it's named for Mary. And I said, oh, Mary was an English woman. He said, no, Sahib, Mary is mother of Jesus. And then I said, Pakistan is a Muslim country. Why would a Muslim country name a beer and a brewery after the mother of Jesus? And he said, because of her tomb, her grave. She's buried there at that place on the hilltop near the spring. And then I said, you're saying Mary, the mother of Jesus Christ, is buried on a hilltop in the Himalayan foothills in what's now northern Pakistan? He said, most assuredly, Sahib, absolutely correct. It's a holy place last 2,000 years. And now my mind reeled at that. I was just boggled, and I was thinking, isn't it strange? In the Holy Land, there's no traditional tomb of Mary, and right. Of course, Mary is really important in the Christian religion. And the explanation is that Mr. Wilson gave. He said she did not die there, and he explained that Jesus on the cross. Many Muslims believe, and some other people believe, that Jesus was in a state of near death, but did not die on the cross. He survived the crucifixion, later returned to India, and his mother Mary insisted on going with him on the journey on the Silk Road, and she died in what's now northern Pakistan, and that's why she's there.
Wow.
Amazing
Sasha,
story.
any questions? That's the story. Yeah. Sasha, any questions? Your turn.
Amazing.
Wow, just I'm tripped out. The story of Mary sounds so much like a modern E.T. abduction that it's phrased in old terms, but it sounds like what goes on all the time with extraterrestrial impregnation of women.
Yeah, my understanding is that from the Meyer case, the Billy Meyer contactee case out of Switzerland, which I believe is genuine, I believe it's for real, and in the Meyer material is given from the Pleiadian extraterrestrial humans, and some people call them the Pleiaren. But from the Pleiadians, they explain that the biological father of Jesus, also called Emmanuel, the one with godly knowledge, that the biological father was a Pleiadian commander named Gabriel, and that the insemination of Mother Mary was artificial insemination by agreement with Mary, and then the cooperation of Gabriel, the Pleiadian commander, so that his biological father was Gabriel, and his soul, as I understand, his human spirit, his human soul, came from another star system in the Milky Way galaxy, where the human soul's very advanced. So it's amazing information.
Great. Well, we're looking at the El is the name of God. El means God. So Gabriel and Michael and Kal-El and Jor-El and all these names have El in it, and El means God. So then the question is, who and what is God?
Mm-hmm. The question.
So, yeah, is God an extraterrestrial? We're talking about the historical, biblical, or the God that's written about. There might be like source or oneness. We're separating the spiritual from the physical, or the beings that tend to incarnate or visit Earth. And so we're looking at who was this. So it makes sense that the Pleiadians they're also they coincide with the Anunnaki story. So we'll pull that into it later. But so you're saying that she was in agreement. It was an artificial insemination, and that the soul came from a more highly evolved realm than the realm of souls where the human beings are coming from. Is that what you're saying? It's a different place than the human souls come from?
According to the history, the material from the Pleiadians in the Billy Meyer case, they say that the human soul that incarnated as Emmanuel, as Jesus, that the Pleiadians made a special trip to a planet that they know of called La Sonne, that's in one of the star systems in one of the outer arms of the Milky Way galaxy. And the souls at that planet, the human souls, are so spiritually advanced that they don't use human bodies anymore, but they exist, as you could say, bundles of energy in small soul groups, like a floating kind of a glowing basketball-shaped energy object, and there might be 8 or 10 or 12 of those together in a ringed group. And the Pleiadians requested, they visited there a bit more than 2,000 years ago, and they said that at the beginning of each of the 2,000-year cycles on the Earth, they want the creational teachings of creation to be taught afresh in their truthfulness and completeness, and they requested a very wise, knowledgeable human spirit with great wisdom to be willing to come with them to the earth, and for that soul to go back into a flesh and blood body, to be incarnated, and then to do that teaching 2,000 years ago. And so the story, according to the Pleiadians in the Meyer case, that was what happened, was that that one of the advanced human souls at Lawson planet agreed to do that, and then a soul group, 10 or 12 souls, came with the Pleiadians aboard their ship, came to the Earth. And my understanding is that Billy Meyer, that his soul was one of the other advanced souls in that soul group. But so that explains the very advanced nature of Jesus spiritually, and then of course the other aspect of things is that I believe that Jesus wanted to be an example, that he wanted to be a living example for people to emulate, and I don't believe that I believe that Jesus was teaching reincarnation and karma, and he was trying to help people and encourage people to grow spiritually, not to put him up on a high pedestal and worship him as God and be preoccupied with salvation. We're all who live forever, and and go on and on.
So it seems like so this was an intervention into humanity, because we have not only do we have the virgin birth of Jesus, or whatever that means, virgin birth, insemination, but Mary herself was a result of a magical birth. Her parents they couldn't conceive, and so she was born after the natural, after her mother had gone through menopause, was old. And she was raised in some kind of sacred place, according to the lost books of the Bible. And then, of course, we have the angels and the star. And so this was a major intervention into humanity's story.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So what was this star? Was it a ship? What have you discovered that led the wise men?
I couldn't. I'm sorry. We have some storming off in the distance here. There's some lightning, and so there's some static on the line. Sometimes some of the words get kind of blocked out by some of the static. But could you or could Sasha say that, or could someone rephrase it?
Janet wants to know whether the extraterrestrials guided the Persians who came to Bethlehem and recognized Jesus and told all the shepherds that Jesus had arrived. She wants to know about that.
Exactly.
Was that a star or a UFO? What was leading these people?
A UFO. That my understanding is that it was a UFO, and if you incidentally, if the movie Ben-Hur, if you rewatch the beginning first few minutes of that movie Ben-Hur, when they are showing the recreation of the events at Bethlehem and the birth of baby Jesus in the barn, the cave with the animals and so on like that, and they show that in the movie quite well. They show a moving, hovering light that stops and it shines down this beautiful blue kind of a pencil-like searchlight at the location of the birthplace, the cave, the place like a barn, like a stable, where the animals were, and where Mother Mary and Joseph were, and where baby Jesus was born. In other words, yes, I think they were extraterrestrials who were guiding the wise men, the Magi. I think so. And if you read the Talmud, the manual document says the same thing, that a moving light stopped and hovered and was shining down a light at the location. Go ahead.
Oh, some of the scholars I read would say that young Jesus was totally overcome with grief when he found out that Mad Herod had, after he talked to the Persians and they didn't return to him, he had his spies say where Jesus was born, and actually murdered the kids in that in the city. And when Jesus, as a little boy, found out about that, he was overwhelmed with grief. And I just wonder if you had anything on that story.
Well, according to my friend, Dr. Jim Deerdorf, who's been a dear friend and a mentor to me for many years. Of course, Dr. Deerdorf was one of the main researchers of the Talmud of Emmanuel document, the Proto-Matthew document that Billy Meyer and Issa Rashid discovered in the Hinnom Valley in 1963. But Dr. Deerdorf, in his research, Dr. Deerdorf told me that he and some other New Testament scholars believe that the story about Herod giving the order that all the baby boys, young baby boys, under 2 years old, under 3 years old, and so on like that, be put to death there in Bethlehem. According to Dr. Deerdorf, what he found no historical confirmation. In other words, Dr. Deerdorf believes that, you see, it was just like if someone made up stories about Adolf Hitler, for example, having big barbecue parties with roasted Jewish babies. Would people believe it? Of course they would. People hate Adolf Hitler and what Hitler did. So if someone made up an abusive story about Hitler, people would believe it. Well, the same way with Herod the Great. Herod the Great was really hated, and so for some people in the early Christian church to make up a story that way about Herod the Great, a lot of people would be happy, would easily believe it. And whereas the Talmud of Emmanuel, incidentally, points out that at the time of the birth of Jesus, that the ruler in Judea was not Herod the Great, but rather Herod Antipas, and that Herod Antipas was one of the sons of Herod the Great. Now, and incidentally about Herod Antipas, that not only is Herod Antipas mentioned several times in the Talmud of Emmanuel document, but the wonderful book you may know about, the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ by Levi Dowling, that's channeled material. Levi Dowling was a chaplain in the Union Army in the American Civil War, and Levi Dowling, in the years after the Civil War, late at night would often go into a deep trance state and contact the Akashic records. Same place Edgar Casey went to find out about past lifetimes. But in the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ, in that book, that it says the same thing. Herod Antipas was the ruler of Judea at the time that baby Jesus was born. So, in other words, that's just a little historical piece that I thought I'd throw in there that people can be aware of and can find out about. That I believe that also, that Herod Antipas, not Herod the Great, was the ruler at that time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well,
so continue the story.
Well, it makes sense to go on chronologically in the sequence of this child's life. What happens next and next and next.
Well, I'm sorry. Say that over again, Sasha. The
well, okay. The regular story is that Joseph took his family to Alexandria to protect Jesus. I'd like to know what your take as a historian is on that part.
My understanding is that the Talmud of Emmanuel clearly says that at first that the ruler that Herod Antipas was frightened, that he was afraid that the baby that the wise men, the Magi told about, would wield terrible power, and so he was afraid. And so yes, the angel did. I think it was probably an extraterrestrial, human extraterrestrial, such as from the Pleiades. But anyway, an angelic being, you could say. That's how they said it. Warned Joseph, and that Joseph took his wife and child in the night, in the middle of the night, and they got on. They got their donkeys and other animals. They fled and went to Egypt. And then the Talmud of Emmanuel says that later the fear subsided in Herod Antipas, and that he no longer was afraid of what the little child might become and might do. And then, of course, it was safe for Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus to return to Judea after that, to return to go to Nazareth.
Did they go to Egypt? Where did they go from the birth?
To Alexandria.
To Alexandria.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard Alexandria. Yeah, I've heard Alexandria. There are different traditions of, also for that matter, about where the wise men are from. Some researchers think the wise men may have actually come all the way from India, and that there were great rishis, great sages, and then other people think that the wise men came from Persepolis and that area in Persia, in Iran, and then other traditions, like in the Ben-Hur movie, one of the wise men was from Alexandria. I think it was Balthasar being from Alexandria. So there are different traditions about, but I believe the wise men did exist, and I believe they were guided by a UFO.
All right. So then are you following the story? Does he come back and he talks to the elders when he's 12? That's like the next historical thing that happens that's major. All of a sudden we see
he comes
Jesus
to Nazareth.
coming out of the. Yeah, he comes in to Nazareth and he talks to the. Is that what your research is showing? That's the next major incident in his life. What happens next? Go ahead.
You're talking about those early events and so on like that.
Yeah, when he was 12 years old, he talks.
One of the stories that I was acquainted with is that when they returned from Alexandria, they first went to the temple, and at that time there was these terrible riots, and he saw horrible things going on. Do you have anything on that story?
Yes, my understanding is that I think it was around that time that John the Baptist was born, and of course John the Baptist was the cousin of Jesus. So I think around that time John the Baptist was born, and then of course that after the birth in Bethlehem and so on like that, then it was later, of course, that Jesus grew up with Mary and Joseph in Nazareth, and then it was at the age of 12 that at the feast of the Passover that it's in the second chapter of Luke, the latter part of the second chapter of Luke, that Mary and Joseph and young 12-year-old Jesus there at the feast of the Passover in Jerusalem, and then they got ready to leave at the end of the Passover celebration, and then they were actually on the road. They were actually on the road, and they were leaving Jerusalem. And then what happened? What happened was that there was what happened? They were on the road. They were looking for where Jesus was, and to find him, he was not with them. And then they went back to the temple area, and Joseph was asking about where Jesus was, and one of the guards said that he's talking with the priests and the high priest. And the Aquarian Gospel document gives some information that the one of the important priests at the time there was Rabbi Hillel. And if you remember, in the Jewish traditions, Rabbi Hillel was a very respected historical figure around that time. And in fact, on that Dr. Bronner's peppermint soap, if you look on that blue label, Rabbi Hillel is mentioned on that blue label, Dr. Bronner's peppermint soap. But anyway, but Rabbi Hillel, according to the Aquarian Gospel, Rabbi Hillel was for some time a mentor of young Jesus when he was around 10, 11, and then 12 years old. But anyway, at the time that Jesus was 12, then one of the things that what happened after they found Jesus in the temple, then Mary scolded him in a way, and then Jesus replied, "Know ye not that I must be about my Father's business?" It says that Mary treasured those things in her heart. And then the second chapter of Luke, the 52nd verse says, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." And then and that's all that is mentioned in the Bible, covering the 18 missing years. And then the next verse is the beginning of chapter 3 of Luke, and Jesus is 30 years old. He's at the River Jordan, and he's about to be baptized by his cousin John the Baptist. So there's an 18-year jump, and no explanation. And my producer friend Paul Davids, he says that in the movie business they call that a jump gap. And he said that anyway. What I would say is that when that jump is there because there's something important they do not want us to know about or even to talk about.
So what happened?
So what have you discovered?
So what happened was that Jesus went to India, and one way or the and here are the two main teachings, and the one teaching in the Aquarian Gospel, book gives the explanation that there was a patron, there was a prince named Ravana, who was from northeastern India, the state of Orissa. We went there, by the way, to Orissa when we were filming our Jesus in India movie several years back, Paul Davids and I and our team. And the capital of Orissa is Bhubaneswar, and on the coast there is a wonderful place, Puri, and at Puri is the 2,500-year-old Jagannath Temple. But the Aquarian Gospel tells how that Prince Ravana from Orissa was standing in the room there at the temple in Jerusalem when Jesus was 12 years old, and Prince Ravana had traveled there with his group helpers and so on from India, and they were listening, and then Prince Ravana was very impressed with Jesus, and then so Prince Ravana and his group went up when Jesus and his parents left to go back to Nazareth. Prince Ravana and his group went to Nazareth too, and for every night, for about a week, they put on a banquet for everybody in Nazareth. And Prince Ravana paid for the banquet every night, and Mary and Joseph and Jesus were the guests of honor. And so Prince Ravana made the offer that young Jesus could come and with his group, and they would go to India. And then Prince Ravana would be his patron, who'd be like a foster parent overlooking his studies at the Jagannath Temple. And Jesus was very keen on doing that. And the parents incidentally had 4 other children by that time. As you can read about in the New Testament, Jesus was not an only child. Joseph and Mary had at least 4 other children. But Joseph and Mary consented, and they let Jesus go with Prince Ravana and his group and to go to India. And so Jesus studied for at least 6 years at the Jagannath Temple, studied the Vedas, the holy teachings of the Hindus. He learned Hindu healing arts, Hindu magic, the many wonderful mystical things, mastery of the chakras, ability to heal the sick and to walk on water and to perform miracles and so on, things that seem like miracles to us. And then the other way that Jesus may have gotten to India was that he may have run away from home at about the age of 12 or 13, joined a caravan of merchants with their camels and horses on the Silk Road, traveling to India, and he may have gone that way. So either way is okay with me. And another way about travel between the Mediterranean and India was by the sea route, and we can talk about that after a while too. That was another way to get to India.
From Aden.
Yeah. You could go down, for example, you could go from Jerusalem, you could take a caravan and a camel caravan, not a very long trip, and go down to Aqaba. You remember that Lawrence of Arabia movie and Lawrence and the Arabs, they attacked from the back. They attacked Aqaba from the rear and did that downhill run, that stampede on the camels to attack Aqaba from the rear. Well, Aqaba, it was a very important port, and there were Arab dhows, the sailing ships that went from Aqaba, and still do, go from Aqaba and then go down around the Horn of Arabia and then out into the Indian Ocean. And if you're making the trip going toward India, if you leave the Mediterranean area and you make the trip going toward India, if you do it in April, around March, April, the winds are at your back, pushing you toward India. If you leave India wanting to return to the Mediterranean by ship, if you leave about September, October, November, the winds will push at your back, pushing you back to the Mediterranean. And the one-way trip by ship, it can be as little as about 60 days to 90 days, is what I'm told. So a pretty quick trip.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
and there were
interesting.
So he gets to Orissa. He's studying the Hindu works. And what about the stories that he also studied Buddhism?
Yeah, there is a lot of evidence that young Jesus studied Buddhism over there in India also. And certainly he studied Buddhism to some extent when he was up in traveling up through Nepal in his early 20s and then on up into Tibet. And he studied with some great Tibetan Buddhist masters. And there are records about that in Lhasa, at the Lhasa Zorpa archives in Lhasa in Tibet. But Jesus studied with Tibetan masters. Jesus also spent some time in his early 20s at Himas Gompa, Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Ladakh in northwestern India, over close to Kashmir, and they still have the written documents, the life of Saint Isa, the best of the sons of men document there, and we got about 5 feet away from it, and we're not allowed to open the storage cabinets there with the ancient books. But the document, there have been a string of witnesses since the 1880s who have witnessed the document, and some people claim that they've seen the life of St. Isa document as recently as the 1990s. But a whole string of witnesses that you can read about in my books, like King of Travelers, Jesus' Lost Years in India, you can read about all of the witnesses, all of the evidence. That's a historical 2,000-year-old written document that details about young Jesus being a student at the Jagannath Temple at Puri for at least 6 years, about his studies in Tibet also, and on and on. Just great detail. So there are written historical documents. There are stone inscriptions about Jesus in India. Of course, there's the channel material from Edgar Casey, from Levi Dowling, and from everybody else. There's just a huge corroboration of materials, and people can ignore the evidence if they want to. But if they want to look at my books, for example, King of Travelers, or my second book, Jesus in India, King of Wisdom, you can read all about it.
Wow.
I have a couple of questions. Fascinating. What
well,
about
thank you.
That he may have run away, and there are stories that he was a child. I guess he didn't have the veil of forgetfulness. He knew who he was. He had total remembrance, because when there's stories in the Lost Book of the Bible that when he went to, I guess it was Egypt, and he made some clay figures and he animated them, and his father Joseph got mad, and plus he killed a child. What about those stories?
Well, there are certainly stories about Jesus in Egypt, that he was in Egypt at I think several times, and including in his 20s and so on before his ministry. There are traditions about Jesus around the age of 10, 11 years old, that he one of the traditions is that Jesus, about the age of 10 or 11, that he went with his great uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, and the Phoenician navigators, Phoenician sailors, and they went by ship all from the coast of coast of Lebanon, that area. They went all the way across the Mediterranean and all the way up to England and Wales, and Joseph of Arimathea owned big tin mining operations, TIN, the metal like you make buckets out of. And Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus up there to visit that area, and they visited Gloucester and different areas in England and Wales. And then there are other traditions, of course, that after Jesus, as a young man in his 20s, came back from India, he spent some time in Greece and traveled elsewhere. That there's so many amazing stories that there's some stories even that Jesus in his 20s before his ministry, that he was over in France for a while, traveling around, and other places in Europe, and then of course when we get into the post-crucifixion events and so on, that these stories just go on and on and on and on. That Jesus could well have traveled to Japan at some time in his later life, in the years after the crucifixion. Could have traveled in Mongolia, and also revisited Tibet, and that Jesus was in places in East Africa, South Pacific. There's a great book called He Walked the Americas by L. Taylor Hanson. That He Walked the Americas book is marvelous, and it's a compilation of all the traditions about Jesus having been in North America and South America, and Jesus having traveled among Native American Indian tribes in North America and South America. So he really got around.
I'd like to know, before we go to post-crucifixion, your take on the stories that that Jesus was preaching in India to the common people, and it really annoyed the upper caste, and that there was a plot to kill him, and he escaped. Did you hear that story?
Yeah, certainly. I'm familiar with that, and the Aquarian Gospel, the Aquarian Gospel book tells quite a bit about that he was preaching against the caste system, in the sense that he was saying at that time, 2,000 years ago, the caste system was very strong, and of course the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas were the ruling class, the Brahmins, the priestly class, and then the Kshatriyas, the professional warriors, the soldiers, military people, and the common people, the Vaishyas and the Sudras, the merchants and the poor farmers were the low classes, and Jesus was, and of course there's a very low group that are called Chitta, the Chitta that handle dead bodies and animal skins and so on. But the Jesus was preaching and teaching that all humans in the sight of God, all humans, all classes of humans are equal in the sight of God, and that the lower castes should not be treated so terribly by the privileged. And and the Brahmins, they hired a professional assassin to try to kill Jesus, but he escaped. I think that Jesus had the ability, when he needed to, he could even make himself invisible and slip away, get out of a crowd, get away from a group. But yeah, they tried to kill him. They certainly did.
Wow.
But, all this travel that he did, that kind of indicates that he probably had some other form of traveling, maybe extraterrestrial, because one human being based, in a lifetime in that type of technology couldn't possibly go to all those places. What do you think about that?
Well, incidentally, in the Talmud of Emmanuel document, there's the 40 days and 40 nights. When in our traditional New Testament, in the 40 days and 40 nights, then Jesus was meeting with angelic beings, or you could say heavenly beings, who bestowed mystical, profound knowledge upon Jesus. And in the Talmud of Emmanuel document, they explain it in a much more sensible, much more believable to me way. They explain that the actual biological father, Gabriel, a human, flesh and blood human being, a Pleiadian, who was a commander, who had his own beam ship, which was, like in the Meyer case, one of those flying saucer, anti-gravity kind of flying craft, like a 30-foot diameter silvery disc. And so according to the Pleiadians, what happened that when the bright light came out of the sky and landed close to the River Jordan, near where Jesus was being baptized by John the Baptist, it was Jesus' biological father, Gabriel, landing in a beam ship. And Jesus, after the baptism, just went on over there, got aboard the beam ship, and they took off.
Okay, and that's it for right now. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you everybody for listening, and hold on, we'll be right back. We'll talk.
Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.
Most guys freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filled with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. The heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are such weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting to danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio!
Tune in Tuesdays at 12 noon Eastern on Studio A to hear Tammy Adams share her knowledge of an unknown realm on Talking with Your Angels. Join Tammy as she uncovers hidden secrets about the spiritual world of angels, ghosts, and other entities that have been with us longer than we know. Tammy is a psychic, a teacher, spiritual coach, a leader in her field, and will be sharing her information and stories with you. So join us on Tuesdays at noon on Studio A. With Tammy's guidance, she'll find out who has been watching over you from the other side, and soon you will be talking with your angels.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com with your host Janet Lesson and Dr. Sasha Lesson and our very special guest Edward T. Martin, and we're talking about Jesus and his missing years and everything else going on with that. But before we get back to our show, I want to invite everybody to please take a few minutes and go over to the donation button on the website at freedomslips.com and donate what you can, $1, $5, $15, $20, whatever you can donate is greatly appreciated. We do appreciate your donations. Your donations allow us, good people at Revolution Radio, to bring shows like this one and other shows to you, and we really appreciate your donations. Thank you very much. Dr. Lesson, are you back?
I'm back. I'm very excited to hear Ed tell us. Here we have a real scholar, not just somebody who is preaching at us or trying to inspire us to follow their religion, but a scholar who's really looking from a modern perspective on just who Jesus was and what a hero he was, helping us to free ourselves from the matrix of disrespect for consciousness. I'm really excited to find out. We're going chronologically, the boy Jesus, the student Jesus in India, and now he returns to do his ministry.
Right. I think we need to cover the baptism, his ministry and miracles, the crucifixion, and then after, what happened after that. So we got 1 hour to cover all this stuff. So take it away, Edward. Where do we go next? I guess the baptism, huh? What happened there?
Yes, the part that I was beginning to explain a while ago was that after the baptism of Jesus at the River Jordan by John the Baptist, who was Jesus' cousin, that's at the beginning of the 3rd chapter of Luke in the Gospels in the New Testament. And what happened according to the Talmud of Emmanuel document, then after Jesus went over to the beam ship that had landed, the bright light out of the sky that landed, and then he got aboard the beam ship, which was a physical metal craft, an anti-gravity craft, and then according to the Talmud of Emmanuel, then for the next 40 days that Jesus was meeting with very wise spiritual teachers who were showing him and explaining a lot of things, a lot of profound spiritual knowledge and other things, including, so there were teachers, several teachers who were very tall human beings from the Pleiades, unusual appearance, and that there were also 2 more normal-sized men who were from Bawi, B-A-A-W-I. Now, if you were to research, and that mentioned about 2 men of normal stature from Bawi, who were teachers from Bawi. Now, Bawi is it's one of the books that Wendell Stevens wrote, UFO Contact from Planet Bawi, and I talked at times when Wendell, who was a good friend of mine, was living, and Wendell was explaining to me that Bawi is an Earth-like planet that exists in the Proxima Centauri system. The Proxima Centauri star system, I believe it's only about 5 light years or 6 light years away from the Earth. It's one of the very close. Imagine that, only 5 or 6 light years away from the Earth. But anyway, the human beings that the advanced spiritual teachers that met with Jesus were giving him great knowledge. According to the Meyer case, one of Emmanuel's regular, most important teachers was from another exists and did exist and does still exist on another dimension, a nearby dimension, and that teacher is called Atrasata. And Atrasata is supposed to be a very wise, disincarnate spiritual teacher who also is one of the regular teachers of Billy Meyer over in Switzerland, who communicates telepathically with Billy. But Jesus, also called Emmanuel, the one with godly wisdom, that had great teachers, great knowledge and insights, and of course, as a young person in India, studying with his Hindu and Buddhist teachers, and also his Tibetan Buddhist teachers, and so on up in Tibet. That Jesus, and also Jesus is supposed to have been a student at the Hindu Healing Arts School at Benares, where he even studied eye cataract surgery done with obsidian blades and kind of a deadening ointment to remove cataracts from the eyes. So I believe that Jesus did some of his healing purely with spiritual and mental power, and also that he may have used physical devices to do some of the healing, but that Jesus had profound abilities. And one of the little things, if you remember in the Star Wars TV shows, or I should say Star Wars movies, that how you remember how the Darth Vader, if Darth Vader got mad at somebody, Darth Vader could kill by the power of the mind and the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that? If Darth Vader didn't like you, Darth Vader could make you drop dead. And the one of the traditions that I've come across in quite a few places is that Jesus had that ability if he had wished to have used it. And that there's the fig tree, if you remember the account of the fig tree in the Gospels, that the fig tree that did not bear fruit, it was not producing figs, and Jesus basically cursed the fig tree, and the next day they came by and the tree was dead. I don't know if you remember that.
That's what happened with the kids in Egypt. He wished them dead, and his kid was dead. And then his dad.
But then he brought him back to life. Then he brought him back to life.
That he brought him. I've heard that he brought him back to life. I think things like that are very, very possible. Life, the power over life and death. I think that great spiritual masters, male or female, that's one of the abilities that they have, I believe.
Well, when I was looking at John the Baptist, he has another miraculous birth as well. His mother was past the age of menopause, and she became pregnant. It seems that there's a lot of extraterrestrial intervention in these older women. They were probably artificially inseminated. We have the story of Sarah. So who was John the Baptist? I remember reading when I was following the Edgar Casey stuff on reincarnation, and at the Transfiguration of the Mound, it said that who was it? He was Isaiah. Why did they say that Isaiah will come before Jesus comes, before Christ comes? And they say, yes, he has indeed come, and he was John the Baptist. We didn't recognize him. So, do you know who John the Baptist was in the Pleiadian story? Was he one of them?
He had some kind of a connection. That's a good question. John the Baptist had, I believe that he had at least one previous incarnation as one of the important prophets in the Old Testament. And I'm trying to remember which one that he may have been. In other words, there is the passage in our traditional Gospels in which some of the apostles are talking with Jesus, and they say, "But verily, Master, what did the prophets not say that Elias must return before Elijah can return?" And then the passage, the verse after that says that Jesus said, "Verily I say unto you, he has returned, but men have not paid respect to him as they should." And I'm paraphrasing. And then it says the very next passage, and then the apostles understood that he spake to them of John the Baptist. In other words, John the Baptist was the reincarnation, the return of one of the important Old Testament.
I think it was Elijah.
Elijah. Yeah, I think you're right. Elijah.
Went up in he was taken up into the heavens by
right.
by an extraterrestrial.
Right. So it's fascinating. It's an amazing material, and there are a number of accounts that like Abraham's wife Sarah. She was, and of course with, I think, Elizabeth, if I remember the name correctly, Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, when the angelic being told her that she would have a child, she laughed, and because she was considered herself way too old to have a child, but of course she did. And so there are all kinds of miraculous things that I don't know. It's like some of the things they say in India that these things, that miraculous things that if you have knowledge of the limitless potential and limitless, boundless, limitless things that are possible for the human spirit and for the spiritual beings on the other side and so on like that. they play with our physical reality like children playing with bubbles. It's just, there's so many things we think are profound and or impossible, like creating, like Jesus feeding the 5,000 and so on. And over in India, they say, well, that's just duck soup, for a spiritual master, that you take the free-floating prana, the energy particles that permeate all of the universe, and they're certainly throughout the atmosphere here. You take this free-floating prana, the energy particles, you know what fish and loaves look like, for example, at the molecular and the atomic level, and then you just take this through the power of your will and the power of the mind. You take the free-floating prana particles, you arrange them into an energy configuration, which of course becomes physical matter. E equals mc squared. The energy and matter are interchangeable, and anyway, so Jesus knew what the fish and the loaves are like, and how to create them out of the prana, the energy particles in the atmosphere, and he just created the fish. He fed the 5,000, you remember, in the New Testament passage, fed them, and then at the end, the apostles and the other helpers, they picked up the basket, they picked up the leftovers, and there were 12 baskets full of the leftovers of the fish and the loaves. So, the things that the high spiritual beings can do are limitless. It's just amazing.
I have a question. What about all these other stories of a virgin birth and the crucifixion and raising from the dead, or recovering from being killed? They're historical. They're throughout history, and I know David Icke goes through that. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, my understanding is that Jesus at the time of the crucifixion, that incidentally, there are a lot of I tell a huge number of details in my two books, but for example, the centurion at the time of the crucifixion of Jesus was his name was Caius Longinus, and Caius Longinus was good with languages. He spoke not only Latin and Greek, but also Aramaic, the language of Jesus, and possibly several other languages. But Caius Longinus, the centurion, the Romans would often send him to go spy on Jesus when Jesus would be giving a public talk like the Sermon on the Mount and so on. And Caius Longinus would put robes on and put a hood over his head and go listen to what Jesus was saying to gather evidence for the Romans of heresy and so on. And just like in the 1920s, 1930s in India, the British authorities sent British soldiers to go spy on Mahatma Gandhi and listen to Gandhi's talks when Gandhi would talk to large crowds in English. And English is, of course, a lingua franca, a widely spoken language in India then and now, and so a lot of times you get a mixed group in India, and the only language they all understand is English. And but the English soldiers would listen to Gandhi, and many of them became believers of Gandhi's teachings. And the British finally had to stop sending spies. But anyway, a similar thing happened with Caius Longinus, the Roman centurion, that he listened to Jesus' talks quite a bit in Aramaic, and he came back and reported to the Romans, he's a holy man. He's not preaching subversion or violence or warfare. He's a holy man, and his teachings are good. And but with Caius Longinus at the crucifixion, what I'm getting at is that it was the last day of work for Caius Longinus, and he was told he was going to oversee a crucifixion of 3 people, and that was the crucifixion of Jesus and the 2 murderers, and Caius Longinus was a closet sympathizer of Jesus and his teachings, and Caius Longinus just felt horrible. And when the time came, after the 3 hours or so, when the big storm was coming, that Caius Longinus made a superficial cut to the hip area of Jesus, and out came what looked like blood mixed with water, that is the clear lymph. as is the case with someone who's either dead or near dead. Their circulation has slowed down a lot. And so what happened was Caius Longinus then, whether he knew Jesus was actually dead or near dead, Caius Longinus said to his soldiers, he's dead, it's finished, let's leave and go back to the barracks. And they all were eager to go back to the barracks. And it was Joseph of Arimathea, the great uncle of Jesus. Joseph of Arimathea's younger sister was Anna. Anna was the mother of Mary. Mary was the mother of Jesus. So Joseph of Arimathea, one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the ancient world, was standing there watching the crucifixion of his great-nephew Jesus. And Joseph of Arimathea probably could see auras, and he could see that Jesus was only half dead. He could see the aura was still active. He was still alive, but his breathing was very shallow. He might have even been in a yogic state, a kind of semi-conscious, suspended animation yogic state. And
what was he crying out to when he said, my Father, why hast thou forsaken me?
Yes. I've heard different things. I've heard he was crying out to Mother, Father, God. And he's saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Saying, Mother, Father, God, or saying, God, God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the Israelis who never liked Jesus, they say, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Why, my God, why have you slaughtered me? But my understanding is that when Joseph of Arimathea quickly went running probably to see his friend, the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, Pontius Pilate was surprised that a young, strong man in his early 30s, like Jesus, would be dead so quickly from the crucifixion when the legs were not broken. And the breaking the legs, two medical doctors have told me in some detail that to make somebody die quickly at a crucifixion, the way you do it is you break the legs, and then they cannot keep pushing themselves up to keep breathing properly. There's a nitrogen narcosis that builds up in the lungs, and the person dies in less than half an hour, and maybe quite a bit less, maybe 15 minutes. But Jesus' legs were not broken. Pontius Pilate expressed surprise that he was dead so quickly, and with that shallow cut to the hip and so on. But Pontius Pilate gave permission that the body be taken down. And of course, some people can die from shock. And but anyway, the Joseph of Arimathea got permission from Pontius Pilate, and quickly went with his helpers. They got the body of Jesus taken down, put into the custom-made tomb of Joseph of Arimathea in the Hinnom Valley, which is on the north side, maybe about halfway up the Hinnom Valley, below the old wall city, south wall, the old wall city of Jerusalem. And inside of the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, from the descriptions that I've gotten from people who've been there, like Billy Meyer, from in what is told about in the Billy Meyer case, Billy Meyer and Issa Rashid in 1963, when they found the tomb and entered it. The secret of the inside of the tomb is about the size of two Volkswagen minibuses parked side by side. It's big enough to stand up in, and it's the size of a small room. Has the hole in the front that the big round stone could be rolled in front of to seal it. But the important thing is it was a custom-made tomb by an Egyptian stone-cutting team who were hired to follow the directions of Joseph of Arimathea. The tomb of Joseph of Arimathea had a back tunnel entrance. So there was the main entrance, but the back tunnel entrance was a tunnel you could crawl through, and it took you out of the tomb to around a corner of the rock face. So if you were sitting in front, let's say at a campfire, sitting in front of the main entrance of the tomb with the big stone rolled in front, the big round stone, if you were sitting there, you could not see the the back tunnel entrance, the entryway, exitway of that, it was around a corner, around the face of the stone. And that was the way, according to the Talmudic manual document, that there were healers from India, according to the Talmudic manual. We don't know, 2 or 3, something like that, 2 or 3 healers from India, like medical doctors, who had ointments, medicines, salves, bandages, food, water, candles, clothing, bandages, and so on, who came in through the back tunnel entrance after the body of Jesus was put in there on the stone shelf, and the big stone was rolled in front to seal it. Then for 3 days and nights, they ministered to Jesus, and after which he recovered enough, and he was probably using his own ability to heal himself also. He was well enough that he could walk and move around, and they all crawled out and left early in the morning on the 3rd day out the back tunnel entrance. And there's the prophecy that Jesus made in the Talmudic manual, which is, "Verily I say unto you that my sign shall be the same as the sign of Jonah." Jonah, who having gone into the mouth of the whale, after 3 days and nights, Jonah emerged alive from the whale and lived again.
Wasn't the whale just a submarine or something?
It could have been. It could have been. It could have been. Yeah. But what I'm getting at is that Jesus said that he would be put into the earth and thought to be dead, and after 3 days and nights he would emerge from the earth alive to live again. The same as the sign of Jonah.
What happened next?
Next, after Jesus made his appearances, back to his apostles, and that he, including to Thomas, doubting Thomas, and they touched the wounds. He was in his physical body. He made his appearances, and then later, then Jesus was after he made his appearances. One of the traditions is that at nighttime that he said his farewell I think that was close to Gethsemane. He said his farewell, and then his father Gabriel, the Pleiadian commander, had a beam ship hovering above with a levitation levitation beam pointed down, and just levitated him up and shined a bright light on him. Wouldn't that get your attention? Especially 2,000 years ago. You go floating straight up in the air, 100 feet or so, into a bright light, and so of course, then from there, the light took him to Damascus, and for 2 years, according to the Talmudic manual, Jesus was living in a safe house in Damascus, probably belonged to his great uncle Joseph of Arimathea. He was recuperating and living in that safe house in Damascus. He was joined by his mother. Mother Mary came up there, and then several of his faithful followers, including Judas Iscariot, who, according to the Talmudic manual, was not the betrayer. The real betrayer, according to the Talmudic manual, was someone with a similar name, Judah Iscariot, and Judah Iscariot was the son of Simeon Iscariot, one of the powerful, rich Pharisees. And it was Simeon Iscariot who was the real betrayer, who betrayed Jesus for the 30 pieces of silver, and also stole one of the original copies of the Talmudic manual, the written writing by Judas Iscariot, the scribe and treasurer of Jesus' teachings. But it was Judah Iscariot who committed suicide, and then it was the scribes and Pharisees, the priest and the high priest, who switched the names, and they bribed the people to spread the news that one of his own chosen 12, Judas Iscariot, was the betrayer who had hanged himself, committed suicide. But the Talmudic manual explains that it said, sadly enough, Judas Iscariot, the faithful scribe, would be wrongfully accused of the crime for 2,000 years, but that in the end, after 2,000 years, the time will come when the truth will become known by all in the whole world. And this is Jesus saying this. The truth shall become known by all in the whole world that Judas Iscariot, my faithful disciple was innocent of any wrongdoing. He did not betray me. It was Judah Iscariot, the son of Simeon, who betrayed me and hanged himself.
Was Jesus joined in Syria, in Damascus, by his wife, Mary Magdalene?
Well, that's a good question, Sasha. I tell you what, my understanding is that Mary Magdalene, at the time of the crucifixion of Jesus, she was in the early stages, the first few weeks pregnant with a baby girl, and that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had been secretly married about a year before. And my understanding is that Mary Magdalene, of course, was heartbroken, and she thought that Jesus had died on the cross. And Mary Magdalene, very quickly after that, she left with several of her female friends aboard a ship in the Mediterranean, and that they traveled on the ship to the south of France. And then Mary Magdalene lived her rest of her life in the south of France, gave birth to a baby daughter with red hair she named Sarah. And this Sarah became the cornerstone of the Merovingian royalty of France. One of the ladies in our movie, by the way, Indiana Sue, anyway, she is one of the biological descendants of Sarah, the daughter of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and her family was called is called the Demarest family, and they came from France to America in the 1700s. But that's an amazing lineage. And then another part of the story is that from Damascus, Jesus and Mother Mary and Judas Iscariot and some other people, they joined a camel caravan, and they fled in the camel caravan and then made the journey to India. It was the second time for Jesus to go to India and the first time for the others. And, of course, that his mother Mary died in what's now northern Pakistan, and she died in the springtime, about April, and there was a wonderful spring of water at that place at the base of a hill, and the tradition is that she asked her son Jesus and the others if they could just stay there for a few weeks while she was so sick. And the story is that sometimes at sunset, even though she was sick, she would get a couple of the servants to help her, and they would walk up the hill to the top, and there was an orchard at the top, and there were blossoming fruit trees, and so it was April, May, that time of the year, around this time of the year, and that she would, Mother Mary would sit up there, and one of the servant women would bring a flask of wine, and Jesus would join them sometimes, and they would drink some wine up there and watch the sunset and sit among the blossoming fruit trees. And then when Mother Mary died after some weeks, then they buried her up at that place, the top of the hill where she loved to watch the sunsets. And that's where her tomb still is. And the place there is named after her, Murree, 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 in the Himalayan foothills. It's 40-some-odd miles out of, to the northwest, as I remember, out of Rawalpindi. And at that place, there's a Murree brewery. There's a beer, Pakistani beer, that uses that wonderful spring water, and it's a brewery there called Murree, and that's the beer that I found that day. Wow. First chapter in my book, King of Travelers, the Murree beer.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing. I wouldn't have. Amazing story.
The story that Jesus had a couple of sons. Have you tracked that down? Besides the girl, there were three children, and the story is there's all these stories, right? That he took one or both of his sons to India with him at some point. So, and the story is that the wedding at Canaan was actually Jesus' wedding to Mary Magdalene. It wasn't somebody else. It was a twisting.
Yeah, I've heard different traditions and different stories. I believe that I certainly think it's possible that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had secretly been married. And of course, Mary Magdalene was by all accounts, Mary Magdalene was a strikingly beautiful woman, just a gorgeous, remarkably beautiful woman, and that many of the Roman soldiers at the time during Jesus' ministry, that quite a few of the Roman soldiers were lusting after her and might have tried to bother her, or even some of them might have wanted to rape her and so on like that, but they were afraid of Jesus, and they knew that she was the beloved of Jesus, and that, in other words, Jesus, as we talked about earlier, that Jesus very probably had that ability with the mind and the spirit that if he had wished, he could have even struck people dead. So the Romans were afraid, but after the crucifixion, it was like Mary Magdalene thought that she had lost her protection, and she felt she had to get out of there. And another one of the traditions is that about northern Pakistan is that Jesus, not too far from the tomb of Mother Mary, in one of the valleys, there's a tomb of Jesus' donkey. Jesus had a donkey that died a day or two, or something like that, after the death of his mother, after the burial of his mother, and that the donkey was buried with Egyptian-type funeral rites for a sacred animal. And Suzanne Olsen, the lady I mentioned, the Mary Magdalene descendant, Suzanne Olsen, even met a Pakistani guide in that area, northern Pakistan, who claimed that his village knew where the tomb of Jesus' donkey is. But Jesus continued another 100 miles across the mountain passes after the burial of his mother, and arrived in Kashmir. And in about May, June, around this time of the year, he arrived in Kashmir. He was at a high, wonderful meadow up there, high, cool meadow with lots of green grass, pine trees, conifer trees, white snow-capped Himalayan peaks in that area, beautiful lakes, and that place is called Pahalgam, which means Shepherd's Meadow, and that Jesus stayed at least a couple of months at Pahalgam, and he was teaching and he was healing sick people there, and the villagers gave him a hut that he could stay in temporarily, and that while Jesus was there, that's when the king of Kashmir came out one day, probably in the month of June that year, King Shalivahan. And King Shalivahan and some of his helpers went out in their chariots and went out to go out to Pahalgam, go walking in the meadows and look at wildflowers. And they came across a holy man sitting on a blanket in the meadow. And the holy man, they came up behind him, and it was like Yoda doing something in Star Wars. The holy man was looking at two small piles of stones and pointing at them, and with the power of the Spirit, he was one by one levitating stones from one pile to another. And the story was that King Shalivahan was saying to his people, "Oh, he's a real holy man. I got to meet this guy. He's a real powerful holy man. I got to talk to him." So King Shalivahan invited Jesus to come and have lunch at the palace, and then King Shalivahan and Jesus became friends, and then King Shalivahan offered a job to Jesus as being his regular spiritual advisor and counselor. Kind of like one of the, in the Star Trek TV shows, the ship commander always has his counselor, like Deanna Troi.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, get a spiritual counselor. Sure, get somebody good. And can you imagine any better spiritual counselor than Jesus? And the story was that King Shalivahan, the deal he made with Jesus, he gave Jesus a house to live in, fixed him up with a housekeeping lady to cook his meals, wash his clothes, clean the house, so on. And all Jesus had to do was every day at lunch go have lunch at the palace with the king and the king's guests, and there'd be diplomats and heads of state and all kinds of government visitors and foreigners and so on visiting the king, King Shalivahan, and Jesus would be there at the meal and listening and chit-chatting and having the lunch. And then at the end of the lunch, then the guests would leave, and then the king would talk privately with Jesus. And you can imagine things like, the ambassador from Siam or the diplomat from Mesopotamia, what did you think about that individual and this and that? So Jesus was able to give his insights. And Jesus, according to the written records, Jesus was advisor to King Shalivahan for more than 40 years. And that Jesus also, according to the Talmudic manual, Jesus' neighbor there in Srinagar, in the old section of the city, the Rosabal section, his neighbor and lifelong friend was Judas Iscariot, the one of Jesus' original chosen 12, his scribe. And Judas Iscariot lived to about the age of 90, and that Jesus lived to about the age of 110, maybe a bit older, and that Jesus married while he was there and working for King Shalivahan. Jesus married his housekeeping lady, and her name was Marian, and they had several children. And the oldest, so Jesus and his neighbor Judas Iscariot there in Srinagar, that over a course of time they rewrote and wrote a fresh copy of the Talmud of Emmanuel document, the teachings of Jesus, and then when Jesus died in his old age, before his death, he asked his oldest son Joseph, who was named after the surrogate father, if the oldest son Joseph would take the Talmud of Emmanuel, the Aramaic written scrolls in the preservative resin, and take those back to the Holy Land, back to Jerusalem, and take them to the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea in the Hinnom Valley, to go in the tomb either by the front entrance or the back tunnel entrance and pick up the flat stones on the floor and look under them, and there'd be a cavity, and to put the Talmudic manual scrolls in the preservative resin inside of a stone box with a stone lid, put that in the cavity under the flat stone, cover it with the flat stone. And then it was in 1963 that Billy Meyer and Issa Rashid were directed to go there, and they looked, and that's what they found. They found the stone box under the flat stone with the scrolls, and for the next 11 years, Issa Rashid did the translation from Aramaic to German. Billy did the translation from German to English. And if the listeners that would like to visit a really good website about the Talmudic manual, they could go to www.tj, T as in Thomas, J as in John, tjresearch.info. That's tjresearch.info. And that's the website of my dear friend, Dr. Jim Beardorf. And I've heard that Jim may have died just sometime recently. I'm sad to hear that. And one other thing, the official website for the movie Paul Davids and I made based on my first book, King of Travelers, that movie that Paul Davids and I filmed in India with our team several years back, that website is www.jesusinIndiathemovie.com. So just Jesus and then I-N, India, I-N-D-I-A, themovie.com. So if you go there, there's a great 2.5-minute preview of the movie, great scenery from India and the Vatican and elsewhere, dozens of wonderful photographs from India and many other places. And you can also order my 2 books, the King of Travelers and also Jesus in India, or King of Wisdom, Jesus in India. And you can see a lot of other great materials. And another great website is www.tombofjesus.com, tombofjesus.com, and that website is out of London, England. And one of our good friends, who's an Ahmadiyya Muslim, scholar and researcher Arif Khan, who lives in London, England. Arif Khan coordinates and maintains that website, tombofjesus.com. And if any of your listeners are interested about getting a trance reading from Dr. Leo Sprinkle up at Laramie, Wyoming, I mentioned Leo earlier in the interview. He's a dear friend of mine, very spiritual man. Leo wrote the foreword for my first book, King of Travelers. And Dr. Leo Sprinkle he's a retired psychology professor at the University of Wyoming, Laramie. And Leo has his clinic now, and he has his own private practice. But Leo, if you're there at Laramie and you want to get in touch with Leo, his office number, his clinic number is area code 307-721-5125. That's 307-721-5125. And if you want to reach Leo at his home, he told me it's okay to give his home number. Leo's home number is area code 307-745-7897. That's 307-745-7897. Dr. Leo Sprinkle. And what you can do about the trance, you can get a trance reading or a number of them if you want. They cost. He charges. You can find out the current price, but the last price I heard was $45 for half an hour, and you don't have to meet him. You can call him up from anywhere. He's easy to talk with and likes to be called Leo, Dr. Leo Sprinkle, PhD, and tell Leo that what your question or questions are, like you could ask about past lifetimes. This is duck soup. It's very easy for Leo spirit guides. You can ask about past lifetimes between you and anybody else, your spouse, mother, father, brother, sister, daughter, son, anybody, neighbor, employer, anybody, and or any other question that you may have. The spirit guides. I found those readings from Leo Sprinkle to be very accurate. He'll do the reading for you off the phone, recorded on a cassette, send you the cassette, and you can send the payment for the reading. But I found them to be very accurate, and the readings also. It was Leo in one of those trance readings. Leo told me that I about 10 years ago I asked Leo if I had any past lifetimes with Jesus, and if so, if I in the 2,000 years ago, and if I ever knew Jesus or had any dealings with Jesus. And he said in the trance reading that his spirit guide said, I was a young Hindu priest 2,000 years ago named Lamas Gupta. I lived in northern India in the Himalayan region, and I carried messages and documents between remote ashrams and monasteries. And when I was still a young man in my early 20s, there came a 16-year-old boy on school vacation from the Jagannath Temple who wanted to go to a remote ashram, and I offered to guide him, and the 16-year-old boy was young Jesus. And that we got to know each other pretty well over a course of days and days, walking through the Himalayas and talking, and I've done a lot of that in this lifetime. In fact, one time I walked 150 miles in the Himalayas in Nepal, going to Everest Base Camp. But anyway, that Leo can do those readings, trance readings, and the information I found in those readings is very accurate. I believe it's very accurate and very helpful. And yes.
Oh, just Ed, you talked about Mary Magdalene's line being part of the Merovingian line in France. What happened to the children of Marianne and Jesus? What happened to that line?
I do not know. That's one of the threads that I have not yet followed. That Jesus had, I'm sorry. Are you talking about? Do you say Mariana? Are you talking about the wife in Srinagar?
Yes, the Indian wife in India.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you said a different name. No, Marianne. Marianne, the wife in India, I even know some of the biological descendants. That one of the biological descendants of that lineage is a retired newspaper editor who's a friend of mine in Srinagar in Kashmir. His name is Aziz Kashmiri. And Aziz Kashmiri, he's in our Jesus in India movie that Paul Davidson and I made. And Aziz Kashmiri, I first met Aziz Kashmiri when I was a young Peace Corps volunteer in Afghanistan. And I was 24 years old at the time. But at the time I met Aziz Kashmiri, and Aziz Kashmiri, he, of course, did not tell me right away that he was part of that lineage. But when we were, that's an ongoing lineage, and that it was, in fact, through my friend Dr. Jim Deerdorf, that I found out that the newspaper editor, Aziz Kashmiri, the editor at that time of the Daily Roshni, the Light, the newspaper there in Srinagar, that Aziz Kashmiri is one of the direct descendants of Jesus and Marianne.
Wow.
And when we were there doing the movie, and Aziz invited us over to his house, and we went over there. We met Aziz's son, and we met his several of his grandchildren, and there's a picture in my two books, King of Travelers and Jesus in India, King of Wisdom. There's a picture in my books showing Aziz Kashmiri, myself, and his 12-year-old grandson. And the 12-year-old grandson, I can just imagine, looks a lot like young Jesus. They're good-looking people. But it's a fascinating tradition, and those books by Indiana Sue, by Suzanne Olson, the Suzanne Olson books. She's written books about Jesus in Kashmir, and you could do a search by her last name, Olsssen, I believe. Olsssen, Suzanne Olson. She's also called Indiana Sue, or you could search on. She's a real swashbuckling lady, Indiana Sue.
Indiana
but
Sue.
It's wonderful material. Yeah.
I have a question.
What happened to Jesus' body? Okay, wait.
I'm sorry. What happened to Jesus?
You can ask the body question, then I have a question. Go ahead. What happened to Jesus' body? Does he have a tomb?
I'm sorry, a little more static in the distance here. Go ahead and say it again. What happened to Jesus?
So when Jesus died, what happened to his body?
Well, his body was buried in it's interesting you ask. His body was buried in a specially made tomb that's in the Rosabal, the Kanyar district, the old section of Srinagar, there in Kashmir. And that tomb is called the tomb of Yuz Asaf. Yuz Asaf means the leader of the cleansed lepers, the lepers who are cleansed of leprosy. And that was one of the names he was known by in later life. He was called Yuz Asaf, the leader of the cleansed. Asaf or Safi in that part of the world, that's a common word meaning clean or cleansed of impurity, saf, like in safas, in safias, this is clean. So it's the tomb of Yuz Asaf in the old section of the Rosabal section. You can see a picture of it in my books, and there's pictures about it, material written about Holger Kersten about that tomb. I visited that tomb back when I was 24 years old, in my first trip to India, and I really got goosebumps. Really, things were very peaceful back then. I was 24 years old, and it was just a very peaceful time. And that tomb, as the Muslim tombs point north and south, the Jewish tombs point east and west, and this tomb points east and west like a Jewish tomb. and also the Muslim tombs do not have a cover, a building over them. This has, since it was made, it has a cover, protected building, a house covers it over, and the local Muslims there in that area near the tomb, they like to claim he was a Muslim holy man from Egypt, and but that's the people who are honest about it will tell you that they claim that underneath the sarcophagus, underneath that the stone floor of where the tomb is, they claim that there's a subterranean room with and in the wall is a section, an area where there's a cavity where there is a stone coffin, and that the actual remains are in that stone coffin. In other words, the bones and teeth are in that coffin in this stone box that's in that hidden cavity in the wall that's subterranean below the floor of the tomb. That's what Suzanne Olsen has been told, and because Suzanne Olsen is considered a relative, a living biological relative of Jesus, the local Muslims almost gave her permission to have that opened up. And what she wanted to do, she wanted to compare the DNA between, in the teeth of that body remains of Jesus and the teeth of Mother Mary at Murray, Pakistan. And of course, even if there's an exact DNA match, some people are going to say, so what? But it's a...
Yeah, what is the fuss over the bloodline as it being related to royals or some kind of magical blood or the Illuminati? What did you discover? What's going on there?
About the Illuminati?
Yeah, the bloodline. They're saying that the bloodline is the Anunnaki or the Illuminati and the royals, and they're descended from Jesus. So there's all this fuss over the Holy Grail.
Charlemagne's Pope basically tried to bring the Merovingian line and another line together to rule the world.
That might be. That's the area concerning that, about the French royalty, the bloodline, and concerning Charlemagne, that's actually not my area of expertise. I believe it's possible, it could well be, that is part of the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. It's not really, and about the Illuminati, I'm not really an expert on the Illuminati. It's a good question.
Well, that's because apparently they have more capabilities, the magical qualities, the ability to think somebody dead or maybe, telepathy. So the bloodline is important because these people have greater abilities and more power and control. Something like that.
That could be. I've heard some stories, and I've heard stories about the Roslyn Chapel, and so forth. I'm really, this material is so vast. I've covered a lot of it, but then I will admit that there are gaps in my knowledge. I don't yet know everything about the entire.
You sure have taught us a lot. I just am so awestruck by how much I've learned in these 2 hours. I can't thank you enough.
You're welcome.
We have a couple more minutes. I have one more question. The Mormons are all up in, they're following Jesus when he came to America. When did that happen? Did Jesus come to the Americans, and when was that in his lifetime that he did that?
I think that, you see, when Jesus was back in India at Kashmir and worked as spiritual advisor to King Shalimahan, I think there were periods of what you could call vacation time, free time, and during that time that the Pleiadian Gabriel, the Pleiadian commander, as I understand, did certainly, if you have one of your children living somewhere, you're going to go check on your child sometimes. That yet Gabriel, the Pleiadian commander, certainly made trips back to Earth at times, would go there in his beam ship. And of course, the beam ship, you can go anywhere in the world. You'd get from one point to another in 10 minutes or less, or a few minutes. You could go anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
So he would pick up, as I understand, Gabriel sometimes would meet with Jesus in the Himalayas, in that area of Kashmir, and then they'd meet out in the countryside or something, and then Jesus could make an arrangement. Well, I'd like to go over to the Americas, North America, South America, and spend a few weeks or whatever, and a few months or whatever, and then, or the same thing with traveling to other places, East Africa, South Pacific. There's some evidence I've heard Jesus also could have been down in Australia. Could have traveled in Australia.
What about the ability of the yogis to bilocate? I was beginning to read the autobiography of a yogi about Yogananda, and he talks about his teachers are able to bilocate. They're physically in another place. They'll be visible, sitting in lotus in one place, and then someone will see them, on the other side, hundreds of miles away. So maybe that would account to some of these, visitations that, Jesus was a yogi, and he could bilocate.
Sure. As I understand that great yogis have that ability, and their historical records about great spiritual people who have disintegrated or disappeared their body from one location and reappeared their body hundreds or even thousands of miles away, walked and talked, and people have seen them and touched them, and they've been real. And then after they finish their mission in that other place, they disassemble their body, and then they travel through space and back to where they first were. I think Jesus could certainly do that. He could have gone to the Americas or Mongolia, Japan, anywhere, South Pacific, anywhere he wanted to go. Certainly, I think it's possible.
Fascinating. Well, we have one more minute. What would you like to say to summarize things?
I would just like to say thank you, Janet. Thank you so much, and to Sasha. Thank you so much, also, both of you, wonderful people. And it was so good to meet you back in November at Laughlin at the UFO conference, and which our listeners might want to know about the UFO conference. UFO conference that will be taking place this coming November in Laughlin, Nevada, and do you have a website?
I think it's Starworks USA.
I think so. StarWorksUSA.com, I believe so. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Thank you, listeners. Aloha.
You're very welcome. Thank you.